Hello, welcome to today's video. We are on page 32 of the Keyboard Musicianship book, book 1, and we're talking about improvising and composing. Improvising melodies using the black key pentatonic scales below. The first one, here's middle C. These 5 keys placed in fingers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 over them in this order. Example 2, treble G here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over these black keys in this order. The teacher, note the fingering of each pattern. The teacher accompaniments stress various moods. Here they are. Number 1, number 2. And then number 3. Various moods means different styles of accompaniment. Use elements of repetition, sequence, and contrast. Use quarter notes, half notes, dotted half notes, and whole notes. Develop 4-bar phrases in the beginning and then later expand the length of the improvisation. For today, I think we're just going to stick to 4-bar phrases. So let's talk about each of these elements in turn. The first one is called repetition. Repetition, of course, just means to repeat the same thing over again, either once or twice. So since we are developing 4-bar phrases, we're going to do this in terms of a call and response. The first 2 measures are going to be our call, and the last 2 measures 3 and 4, will be our response, question and answer, antecedent and consequent. So let's go ahead and talk about repetition. I'm going to create a melody, and it's going to only consist of whole notes. We're going to start off with big notes first. I'm going to play the first 2 measures. Each measure will have just a whole note. Let's go ahead and listen to this melody. Here we go. And I'm going to make a skip. Okay. And the skip is going to be a 4th interval right here. So let's go ahead and play that melody. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so C sharp to F sharp. That was my melody for the first 2 measures. A repetition would be to play the exact same thing over again. It's kind of like a repeat sign. And then repeat it again. And there are our 4 measures, our 4-bar phrase. Okay, so repetition means to repeat. Another example with smaller rhythms would be just to repeat that again, even though the first 2 measures were a repetition of themselves. Okay, so repetition, repeat the same thing twice, or you can repeat it 3 times. Okay, the second one is called sequence. Same idea on different pitches. So if we were to go back to our first melody, okay, so I played these 2 notes. We're going to play a repetition of those notes, but I'm actually going to play them starting on different notes. I'm going to move up a second. I'm going to start, instead of C sharp, on D sharp, but I'm still going to move up in a 4th, up to this note. So when sequencing, you're going to repeat or make a repetition of the first 2 measures, the melody exactly the same way, just starting either a second up this way to the right or a second down to the left. Since we're only using these 5 notes or these 5 keys, we're going to go this way since I started on that note. Okay, so here's an example of what the sequence in 4 measures would look like. Now started on this note. Okay, so I played a C sharp to F sharp. That went up a 4th, but then I moved up a second for both of the notes and went from D sharp to G sharp. A sequence means the same idea on different pitches. Let's say I started on this note to begin with. If I wanted to sequence down a second, I would just go down here. And it's kind of like the same thing with backwards. Okay, so sequence, same idea on different pitches. Another example of different types of rhythms or melodies with smaller rhythms. Excuse me. So I played the same different notes, same rhythm, but I started on a different note and just kind of pushed it a little bit to the side. So that's what sequence is. And now for contrast. Contrast is a change in the melody. Now what does change mean? We're going to talk about 3 different elements in change or of improvisation when it comes to contrast. When we create melodies, they have 3 things that must happen or must exist. First, it must have a rhythm. The rhythm was 2 whole notes. Next, it must have intervals. It moved in a fourth, a perfect fourth. Then it must have a direction. The notes went up or to the right from the first note. Going up meaning on staff, the notes would go up. If it went this way to the left, it would be considered going down. So, rhythm, whole notes, intervals, a fourth, and direction, it went up or to the right. So those are the 3 elements that must exist when it comes to our improvisation. When contrasting, we can change at least one of them, or we can change all of them. Or we can change 2 and keep 1 the same, or we can change 1 and keep 2 the same. Let's go ahead and try changing the rhythm, but we're going to keep the melody, so we're going to change the rhythm, but we're going to keep the interval and the direction the same. So remember the first 2 notes. So what changed? Well, the rhythm changed. The first melody or the first measure was a whole note, but measure number 3 was a half note and 2 quarter notes. That is how we changed our rhythm. Let's now keep the let's keep the rhythm the same, but let's change the interval. So notice that the rhythms were exactly the same. They were all whole notes. The interval changed. It went from a fourth to a third. The direction also stayed the same. It went up. Now, let's go ahead and keep the rhythm the same, keep the interval the same, but let's change the direction. So the whole notes were the same, the interval was the same, but the direction, instead of going up, again, it went down. So those are the 3 elements that we need to think about when improvising. Now, it's going to take practice, just like it takes practice reading notes and rhythms on a page, to create notes in your mind. When improvising, these have to be created in the mind before we play them on the piano. It says here that as we develop these 4-bar phrases in the beginning, we'll later expand the length. For now, let's just keep it at 4 measures. Also, when we start off, start with big rhythms like whole notes first, so that you don't have to think about all the changes that you need to make. The most important aspect of improvisation is your memory. Can you remember what you play and what you create? Now, there is another example or exercise of improvisation later in this book that says there are no mistakes. Unfortunately, that is not true. There are going to be mistakes when it comes to staying within the elements of our contrast. So, when we think about improvisation, I would say don't really pay attention to the rules first, just to get your hands dirty a little bit, just to start playing along with my little patterns here, but then start to think about some of these things. Start to create a repetition when it comes to making melodies. Start with your whole notes first. So that, as you can see, was a contrast. Actually, not a contrast, but it was kind of a little bit different. We had two whole notes. It could have been a sequence, went up a little bit. Or if we wanted to make a contrast, so very big difference in rhythm, and the direction was kind of the same. Or sequence. Of course, when we play a melody for the two measures, the next two measures must be starting a second above or a second below. So that's an idea. Okay, so let's go ahead and listen to the teacher patterns here. I'm going to go ahead and count to 4 before we begin. And I want you to start off by playing melodies first. Okay, it doesn't have to be thought out, just play whatever. I will go ahead and play whatever's too. It's not going to have any kind of thinking about it. But then try to create something that either uses repetition, sequence, or contrast. Here we go. Let's start with number 1. For number 1, you're going to use example number 2 pattern set or hand set. Here we go. Ready? Listen first. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's an idea coming up of just whatever. So that was just whatever. But now I'm going to go ahead and give you an idea of, or I'm going to give you an opportunity now to think about using repetition, sequence, and then contrast. I will be playing 16 bars, and then I will give an example of each afterwards. 1, 2, 3, 4. So bar number 16, we made it as just a whole note, so we can end and have a conclusion. Now, let's go ahead and listen to number 2. This one I will not just play whatever, but now you're going to be in example number 1 handset with middle C here. Please use these 5 notes. I'm going to play 16 bars. Come up with something logical, or just come up with something for whatever to start off with, but then try to use repetition, sequence, and contrast. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. bar number 16, conclusion. And then number 3, fast tempo. I'll just keep it the same tempo. And this one here may use any type of rhythm, remember. So try your best to either do whatever at the beginning, but then try your best also to create repetition, sequence, and contrast. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice that one did not end on a whole note. Okay, very good. So let's go ahead and give an idea of each of these. I'm going to use one for each of the examples. I'll do repetition first for number 1, and I'm only going to be doing 4 measures each. This is our hand position. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. Take it back. I was using 8 bars. Okay, so let's go ahead now to number 2. This one, definitely 4 bars. And this one will be sequence. Listen carefully. This hand position. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. It's as simple as that. And then the last one, back to this hand position. This one is going to be a sequence. I'm going to start off by playing 2 measures first to get myself started into the mood, and then we're going to create a sequence, or excuse me, a contrast. 1, 2, 3, 4. Alrighty, there it is. Now, for the last part here of measure 32, after a lot of practice of doing repetition, sequence, and contrast, using all 3 of these ideas, then we're going to actually write down a composition. It says here that we're going to create a melody in 3/4 time using the hand set shown below. So we're going to be having our hands in this position. Left hand here in D minor and right hand in C position. As in improvising, make your composition at least 4 measures, or excuse me, 4 phrases long, which is 16 measures. Use elements of repetition and contrast. I would say to use sequence as well. Your melody should make skips, steps, and have repeated notes. The tonal center will be F. And it will be the beginning note for the left hand, and then the right note, or the right hand, and then the ending note as well. So the big first note is going to be F, and then the last note is going to be F in whatever order you want. It says here that you're going to notate your composition for your instructor on staff paper, and then we're going to, if you want, add some phrasing, dynamics, and a tempo indication. Finally, give your piece a title which relates to the mood of your melody. Now remember, this one here, unlike the teacher patterns at the beginning, is not going to have an accompaniment. It's simply going to be 16 measures of melody. So if you were to come up with something, you could put 4-bar phrases together 4 times. 4 times 4 equals 16. And if you were to put your hands together, you would start first of all on F. So that's 8 measures right there. and all we had to do was continue with 8 more, and boom, you are done. Of course, you would have to start on F. Now remember, try to make it sound good. Don't just throw random ideas of elements of repetition, sequence, and contrast and expect it to be a composition. It should have a direction, it should have a purpose, and it should sound good, like something you can sing along to. Okay? So also, if you want to add some words to this and make it a song, that might be a good idea too. Okay, so hope this was helpful to you for page 32, improvising and composing. We will see you next lesson.